The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress blue uniform one final time. The United States Marine had been selected for the prestigious honor guard detail during a diplomatic visit, representing his country alongside the elite British Royal Guards. At 28 years old, Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and earned a chest full of medals. But nothing had prepared him for the strict protocols and centuries-old traditions he was about to encounter. The Royal Guards stood motionless at their posts, their red tunics and black bearskin hats creating an intimidating wall of discipline. Marcus had heard stories about their legendary stoicism, how they could stand for hours without moving a muscle, ignoring tourists who tried everything possible to make them break character. These men were not just ceremonial figures. They were active soldiers from elite regiments with combat experience rivaling his own. As Marcus took his assigned position near the palace gates, he noticed the curious glances from the growing crowd of tourists. Americans were rarely seen in such formal ceremonies, and his presence had already started drawing attention. The Royal Guard standing 10 feet to his left was Corporal James Wellington, a veteran of the Household Division who had served in Iraq and maintained his post through rain, snow, and blazing summer heat. The ceremony was set to begin in 2 hours, but protocol demanded they assume their positions early. Marcus felt the weight of representation on his shoulders. He was not just a Marine today, but an ambassador of American military excellence. The slightest mistake would reflect poorly on his entire corps and country. He had spent weeks studying British military customs, learning the precise timing of movements and understanding the deep respect required for royal protocol. The first hour passed without incident. Marcus maintained perfect posture, his eyes fixed straight ahead, breathing controlled and steady. The crowd grew larger, with tour groups pointing and taking photographs. A few American tourists recognized his uniform and whispered excitedly about seeing one of their own standing guard at the palace. The pride in their voices reminded Marcus why this moment mattered so much. Children pressed against the barriers trying to catch the attention of the guards. An elderly British veteran in the crowd studied both Marcus and Corporal Wellington with knowing eyes, recognizing the discipline that only comes from real military service. The veteran's wife tugged at his sleeve, asking questions about the different uniforms and what the occasion might be. As the second hour approached, dark clouds began gathering overhead. The weather forecast had predicted possible rain, but ceremonies at Buckingham Palace rarely stopped for anything short of severe weather. Marcus felt the first few drops and knew both he and the Royal Guard beside him would need to maintain their positions regardless of what nature might bring. The crowd sensed something special was about to happen. Tour guides began explaining to their groups about the unique nature of today's ceremony, how rarely American military personnel participated in such events at the palace. Cameras were positioned and phones held ready, as if everyone instinctively knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Marcus could feel the eyes of hundreds of people upon him, but his training kept him focused. In Afghanistan, maintaining discipline under pressure had meant the difference between life and death. Here it meant upholding the honor of his country and corps. The weight of expectation from both the crowd and his British counterparts created a unique kind of pressure he had never experienced before. The palace courtyard fell, unusually quiet as people seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the ceremony to officially begin. Marcus and Corporal Wellington stood like statues, 2 warriors from different nations united in their commitment to duty and honor, unaware that the next few moments would create a story that would be told for years to come. The rain began falling harder, transforming from gentle drops into a steady downpour that sent most tourists scrambling for cover under nearby awnings and trees. Within minutes, the cobblestones became slick and reflective, creating mirror images of the 2 motionless guards who remained perfectly still despite the worsening conditions. Water dripped from the brim of Marcus's cap and rolled down his face, but his expression never changed. Corporal Wellington's bearskin hat, designed centuries ago to intimidate enemies on battlefields, now served as an umbrella of sorts, though water still found its way down his neck and under his collar. Neither guard acknowledged the rain, the fleeing crowd, or each other. Their training had conditioned them to endure far worse conditions, and a London rainstorm was hardly cause for concern. A small group of dedicated spectators remained under umbrellas, fascinated by the unwavering discipline displayed before them. Among them was Mrs. Eleanor Price, a 90-year-old woman who had lived through the London Blitz and recognized true courage when she saw it. She whispered to her granddaughter about how these young men reminded her of the soldiers who had protected Britain during its darkest hours. The ceremony organizers huddled under a covered area, debating whether to postpone the event. Royal protocol was strict, but safety concerns for both the guards and the remaining spectators were mounting. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the wind had begun picking up, making the conditions even more challenging for everyone involved. Marcus felt his dress blues becoming heavier as they absorbed more water, but his marine training kicked in. He had stood watch in Iraqi sandstorms and Afghan blizzards. A British rainstorm was manageable. His mind wandered briefly to his drill instructors, words about Marines adapting to any environment and always maintaining military bearing. Regardless of circumstances, a young boy broke away from his parents and ran closer to the barriers, pointing excitedly at the two guards. His father quickly retrieved him, but not before the child called out, asking why the soldiers were standing in the rain. The innocent question hung in the air, causing several adults to smile at the simple wisdom of youth, questioning what grown-ups accepted as normal. Palace staff members periodically glanced out windows, monitoring the situation below. They had witnessed countless ceremonies in all types of weather, but the presence of an American Marine added an element of international diplomacy that made everyone more cautious about protocol and appearances. The rain intensified further, creating small rivers that flowed between the cobblestones. Marcus's polished shoes stood in growing puddles, but his posture remained ramrod straight. Every muscle in his body was trained to maintain position, and weather was simply another obstacle to overcome with discipline and mental toughness. Corporal Wellington had experienced similar conditions dozens of times throughout his career with the Royal Guards. His training included standing motionless for hours in all weather conditions, often while tourists tried every conceivable method to make guards break character. Rain was actually preferable to the summer heat that could cause dehydration and fainting. The remaining spectators began talking among themselves about the incredible dedication they were witnessing. Some shared stories of their own military service or family members who had served, while others simply expressed amazement at the level of commitment required to stand motionless in increasingly miserable conditions. Television news crews, initially planning to cover the ceremony, found themselves documenting an unexpected story about endurance and duty. The images of two soldiers from different nations standing together in the rain created powerful symbolism that transcended the original purpose of their assignment. As the third hour approached, both Marcus and Corporal Wellington knew they had crossed into territory that would test even their extensive training. The rain continued its relentless assault and the wind grew stronger, but neither guard showed any sign of wavering. They had become living monuments to military discipline, watched by a small but deeply impressed audience who refused to let weather drive them away from witnessing something truly remarkable. The wind suddenly picked up with violent intensity, turning the steady rain into sheets of water that struck both guards horizontally. Marcus felt his cap tugged by the fierce gusts, but his hands remained locked at his sides in perfect military position. The weather had transformed from an inconvenience into a genuine test of endurance that pushed both men beyond normal ceremonial expectations. Corporal Wellington's bearskin hat, weighing several pounds when dry, had become a waterlogged burden that tested his neck muscles with every gust of wind. The chin strap cut into his jaw, but centuries of Royal Guard tradition demanded he maintain position regardless of personal discomfort. His red tunic had darkened to burgundy, clinging to his frame like a second skin. The few remaining spectators pressed closer to building walls, seeking any available shelter while maintaining their view of the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Mrs. Eleanor Price refused her granddaughter's pleas to leave, insisting that she had weathered the Blitz and would not be driven away by rain. Her determination inspired others to stay and witness what was becoming a legendary display of military bearing. Palace officials monitored the situation from multiple windows, torn between admiration for the guards' dedication and concern for their well-being. The ceremony had officially been postponed, but protocol dictated that guards remain at their posts until formally relieved of duty. Radio communications crackled with discussions about when to intervene versus allowing the demonstration of discipline to continue. Marcus's mind entered a meditative state. He had learned during his most challenging deployments. Pain and discomfort became distant sensations as he focused on maintaining perfect posture and breathing rhythm. His Marine training had taught him that mental strength could overcome physical adversity, and this moment was proving that philosophy correct. A news photographer who had taken shelter in a nearby doorway captured images that would later appear in newspapers around the world. The pictures showed two soldiers from different nations, separated by mere feet but united in their unwavering commitment to duty. Water streamed from their uniforms, yet neither man showed any sign of yielding to the elements. The storm reached its peak intensity, with wind speeds that made standing upright a challenge for ordinary people. Yet both Marcus and Corporal Wellington remained motionless, their military training overriding every natural instinct to seek shelter or adjust their positions for comfort. They had become living symbols of what military discipline could achieve when pushed to its absolute limits. A small crowd of local residents had gathered under shop awnings across the street, drawn by reports on social media about the remarkable scene at the palace. Many brought hot tea and coffee for the spectators who refused to leave, creating an impromptu community of people united in their appreciation for the Guards' dedication. The rain began pooling around the Guards' feet, but neither Marcus nor Corporal Wellington acknowledged the rising water level. Their focus remained fixed straight ahead, eyes unwavering despite the stinging rain and howling wind. Every muscle in their bodies worked to maintain stability and perfect military posture against increasingly difficult conditions. Emergency personnel positioned themselves nearby, ready to intervene if either guard showed signs of distress, but both men continued to demonstrate the kind of endurance that made their respective military units legendary. The situation had evolved far beyond a ceremonial duty into a powerful demonstration of human willpower and military excellence. Radio chatter between palace officials intensified as they debated the appropriate response to conditions that were testing the Guards beyond normal expectations. The decision to continue or intervene would need to be made soon, but both Marcus and Corporal Wellington showed no signs of requesting relief or assistance. The storm showed no mercy, battering the two soldiers with relentless fury. Yet their unwavering stance created a stark contrast between nature's chaos and human discipline. Spectators found themselves witnessing something that transcended ordinary military ceremony, something that spoke to the deepest principles of duty, honor, and sacrifice that defined the finest soldiers from both nations. Without warning, a massive gust of wind caught Marcus's military cap and sent it tumbling across the wet cobblestones. For the first time in over 3 hours, his perfect military bearing faced a direct challenge. Marine regulations required proper headgear during ceremonial duties, yet retrieving his cap would mean breaking position and abandoning his post. The crowd held its breath as they watched this unexpected development unfold. Marcus's eyes tracked his cap's movement for a split second before snapping back to their forward position. Every instinct screamed at him to retrieve the cap, but his training ran deeper than instinct. He had been taught that a Marine never abandons his post regardless of circumstances. The cap continued its journey across the courtyard, coming to rest against a drainage grate 30 feet away. Corporal Wellington witnessed the entire incident through his peripheral vision, but maintained his own unwavering stance. In that moment, he faced his own moral dilemma. Royal Guard protocol strictly forbade breaking position during duty, but military brotherhood transcended national boundaries. He recognized the impossible situation his American counterpart now faced. The crowd began murmuring among themselves, understanding the significance of what they had just witnessed. Some called out suggestions, urging Marcus to retrieve his cap, while others respected the gravity of military protocol they were observing. Mrs. Eleanor Price gripped her granddaughter's arm, whispering about the terrible choice the young Marine now faced. Palace officials monitoring the situation realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The loss of a guard's headgear during ceremony created a protocol nightmare that had no clear precedent in either American or British military tradition. Radio communications buzzed with urgent discussions about appropriate responses to this unique situation. Marcus felt exposed without his cap, rain now striking his head directly and running into his eyes. The psychological impact was as challenging as the physical discomfort. His uniform felt incomplete, his military bearing somehow compromised despite maintaining perfect posture. Yet he remained motionless, choosing duty over regulation, honor over comfort. A young boy in the crowd broke free from his parents and ran toward the abandoned cap. His father chased after him, creating a moment of chaos that drew everyone's attention. The child's innocent desire to help the soldier created a touching scene that highlighted the human drama unfolding within military protocol. The storm continued its assault, but something had shifted in the atmosphere surrounding the two guards. Marcus's decision to maintain his post despite losing his cap had elevated the situation beyond mere ceremonial duty. Spectators began to understand they were witnessing a profound demonstration of military character under extreme circumstances. Corporal Wellington's internal struggle intensified with each passing minute. His training demanded absolute stillness, but his conscience urged him to assist a fellow soldier in distress. The conflict between protocol and human decency created a tension that was almost visible to those watching closely enough to notice the subtle changes in his expression. News crews realized they were documenting a story that would be discussed in military academies for years to come. The image of an American Marine standing bareheaded in a British storm, choosing duty over personal comfort, captured something essential about military service that transcended national boundaries and touched universal themes of sacrifice and honor. The rain seemed to intensify in response to the drama, as if nature itself was testing the resolve of both guards to their absolute limits. Water streamed down Marcus's uncovered head, but his posture remained perfect, his dedication unwavering despite the added discomfort and symbolic loss of his headgear. Palace staff members watched from windows with growing admiration and concern. They were witnessing military bearing at its finest, but also recognized that human endurance had limits. The decision about when to intervene was becoming more critical with each passing minute, as conditions worsened and the guard's situation became more challenging. The crowd had grown quiet, sensing that they were observing something extraordinary that demanded respect and silence. The only sounds were wind, rain, and the occasional whispered comment about the incredible dedication being displayed by two soldiers who refused to yield to circumstances that would have broken lesser individuals. In a moment that would be remembered forever, Corporal Wellington made a decision that defied centuries of Royal Guard protocol. Without breaking his forward gaze or changing his facial expression, he began a slow, deliberate movement that sent shockwaves through everyone watching. His left foot lifted slightly from the ground and moved one precise step toward Marcus's position. The crowd gasped audibly as they realized what was happening. A Royal Guard was breaking his post, something that simply did not occur under any circumstances. Yet Wellington's movement was so controlled, so purposeful, that it carried a dignity that transformed violation into honor. His bearskin hat dripped steadily as he took a second measured step. Marcus noticed the movement in his peripheral vision and felt a surge of emotions he had not experienced since his first day as a Marine. Someone was willing to sacrifice their own military standing to help him, and that someone was a soldier from another country who owed him nothing. The gesture spoke to bonds that existed beyond nationality or uniform. Palace officials frantically radioed for guidance as they watched their elite guard abandon his post. No protocol existed for this situation, because it had never happened before in the long history of the Royal Guards. Some called for immediate intervention, while others argued that something profound was occurring that should not be interrupted. Wellington continued his slow march toward Marcus's cap, each step deliberate and measured, maintaining his military bearing even while violating his most fundamental orders. His red tunic was completely soaked, his boots splashed through puddles, but his dignity remained intact. The courage required to make this choice was as impressive as standing motionless for hours. The elderly Mrs. Price began crying as she watched the scene unfold, telling her granddaughter that she was witnessing the kind of brotherhood that had helped Britain survive its darkest hours. Other spectators wiped tears from their eyes, understanding instinctively that they were observing something that transcended military ceremony. News cameras captured every step of Wellington's journey across the courtyard. The images would later be analyzed by military historians, who would debate whether his actions represented the ultimate violation of duty or the highest expression of military honor. The footage showed a man choosing human decency over blind obedience to regulations. As Wellington reached the cap and bent down to retrieve it, Marcus felt overwhelmed by gratitude and responsibility. This British soldier was risking his career, his reputation, and his standing in one of the world's most elite military units to help an American Marine he had never met before today. The weight of that sacrifice was almost unbearable. The storm continued raging, but it seemed less important now than the drama playing out between two soldiers. Wellington straightened up with Marcus's cap in his hands, water dripping from the visor as he began his return journey. His movements remained precise and military despite the fact that he had already committed an unprecedented breach of protocol. Spectators held their breath as Wellington approached Marcus's position. The question hanging in everyone's mind was whether the Marine would accept help that came at such tremendous personal cost to his British counterpart. Military pride and brotherhood were in direct conflict, creating a moment of tension that had no clear resolution. Palace staff members watched from windows with a mixture of horror and admiration. They were witnessing their elite guard breaking every rule in the book, yet his actions carried such nobility that many found themselves hoping he would not be severely punished for his choice. The situation had moved beyond military protocol into something far more meaningful. Radio communications buzzed with debates about whether to intervene immediately or allow the situation to reach its natural conclusion. Senior officers struggled with competing desires to maintain discipline while recognizing that something extraordinary was occurring that might be more important than following standard procedures. Wellington stopped directly in front of Marcus, still maintaining his forward gaze but holding the cap at chest level. Rain continued to fall between them as they stood motionless, two soldiers from different nations connected by a bond that had transcended regulation, protocol, and national identity. The next few seconds would determine how this unprecedented moment would conclude. Marcus faced the most difficult decision of his military career as Wellington stood before him, with the cap extended. Accepting it would acknowledge that he needed help, and had failed to maintain complete military bearing. Refusing it would insult the tremendous sacrifice Wellington had made by abandoning his post. The choice carried implications that would affect both men's careers and reputations for years to come. Time seemed frozen as Marcus weighed his options. His Marine training emphasized self-reliance and never accepting help that came at another's expense. Yet his human conscience recognized the extraordinary courage Wellington had shown in choosing brotherhood over protocol. The rain continued falling between them, but neither man seemed to notice the worsening conditions anymore. In a moment that surprised everyone watching, Marcus did something completely unexpected. Instead of reaching for his cap, he slowly turned his head to look directly at Wellington for the first time. Eye contact during ceremonial duty was strictly forbidden for both men, yet Marcus felt this moment transcended normal military rules. Their eyes met with mutual respect and understanding. Wellington maintained his position with the cap extended, but his eyes returned Marcus's gaze with quiet dignity. Neither man spoke, but a conversation took place between them that needed no words. They had moved beyond being representatives of their respective militaries, and had become simply two soldiers who understood sacrifice, duty, and the true meaning of honor. The crowd watched in absolute silence as this unprecedented exchange continued. Mrs. Eleanor Price later described it as the most moving moment she had witnessed since the end of World War II. The sight of two professional warriors, acknowledging each other as equals, transcended every barrier of nationality, protocol, and regulation. Marcus made his decision with the same deliberate precision that had characterized his entire military career. He slowly reached out and accepted his cap from Wellington's hands, their fingers briefly touching as the exchange was completed. That simple contact carried more meaning than any medal or commendation either man had ever received. Wellington stepped back to his original position with the same measured movements he had used for his journey to retrieve the cap. His violation of protocol was complete, but his dignity remained intact. He had chosen to risk everything for a fellow soldier, and that choice had been accepted with the gratitude it deserved. Marcus placed his cap back on his head with careful precision, restoring his complete military appearance. Yet something fundamental had changed in both men through their shared experience. They had learned that true military honor sometimes required breaking rules to uphold higher principles of brotherhood and humanity. Palace officials who had witnessed the entire Exchange found themselves reluctant to take disciplinary action against Wellington. What they had seen transcended ordinary violation of protocol and entered territory where punishment seemed inadequate to address the complexity of the situation. Discussions continued about appropriate responses to an unprecedented event. The storm began to subside slightly, as if nature itself recognized that the human drama had reached its climax. Rain continued falling, but the wind decreased and the brutal intensity of the weather started to ease. Both guards resumed their forward gaze and perfect posture. But something had fundamentally changed between them. News crews realized they had documented one of the most remarkable displays of military brotherhood ever captured on film. The footage would be shown in military academies around the world as an example of how true honor sometimes requires difficult choices that transcend regulation and protocol. Spectators began to understand that they had witnessed something that would be discussed and remembered for generations. The story of two soldiers who chose human decency over blind obedience would inspire countless others to consider what military service truly meant beyond mere following of orders. As both guards returned to their ceremonial positions, they carried with them a shared experience that had tested their limits and revealed their character. The rain continued to fall, but neither man faced the storm alone anymore. They had found something more valuable than perfect military bearing. They had discovered the true meaning of military brotherhood that transcended every boundary except honor itself. The storm finally began to clear as palace officials approached the two guards with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty about how to handle the unprecedented situation they had witnessed. Senior officers from both the British Army and United States Marine Corps had been summoned to address what had become an international incident that transcended normal military protocol. Marcus and Wellington were formally relieved of their posts simultaneously, ending their vigil after nearly 4 hours of standing in increasingly difficult conditions. As they stepped down from their positions, both men maintained their military bearing, but exhaustion was visible in their movements. They had pushed human endurance to its limits and emerged with their honor intact. The crowd that had remained throughout the ordeal burst into spontaneous applause that echoed across the palace courtyard. Mrs. Eleanor Price was helped forward by her granddaughter to personally thank both soldiers for the incredible display of courage and brotherhood she had witnessed. Her words, spoken with the authority of someone who had lived through Britain's finest hour, carried special weight. In the debriefing that followed, both Marcus and Wellington faced questions about their actions during the storm. Marcus was asked why he chose to remain at his post without his cap, while Wellington was questioned about his decision to abandon his position to help a fellow soldier. Their answers revealed the depth of character that had made their actions possible. Military investigators struggled to categorize what had occurred. Wellington had clearly violated direct orders by leaving his post, which normally carried severe penalties, including possible dismissal from the Royal Guards. Yet his actions had been motivated by the highest military virtues of loyalty, courage, and brotherhood that formed the foundation of military service. The story spread rapidly through social media and international news outlets, capturing public imagination in a way that few military stories ever achieve. The image of two soldiers from different nations standing together in a storm, and the subsequent act of sacrifice and brotherhood, resonated with people around the world who recognized authentic heroism when they saw it. Military academies from multiple countries began incorporating the incident into their curricula as a case study in leadership sacrifice and the complex relationship between following orders and upholding higher military values. The debate about whether Wellington's actions represented the ultimate violation or the ultimate expression of military honor continued for years. Both men were eventually commended, rather than punished for their actions during the storm. Military leadership from both nations recognized that the positive international attention and the powerful example of military virtue outweighed technical violations of protocol. Their actions had elevated the reputation of both their services and their countries. Marcus returned to active Marine duty with a new understanding of what military brotherhood could mean beyond national boundaries. His experience at Buckingham Palace became a defining moment in his career, influencing his leadership style and his approach to mentoring younger Marines about the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. Wellington was not only retained in the Royal Guards but eventually promoted, with his actions during the storm cited as evidence of the kind of character and judgment the service valued most highly. His willingness to risk everything for a fellow soldier became legendary within the regiment and inspired countless others. Years later, both men would meet again at military conferences and remembrance ceremonies, their friendship forged in that London storm, serving as a lasting symbol of the bonds that unite professional soldiers regardless of nationality. Their story continued to inspire new generations of military personnel who learned that true honor sometimes requires the courage to break rules in service of higher principles. The moment that stopped everyone in their tracks became more than just a remarkable display of military bearing under extreme conditions. It evolved into a timeless example of how individuals can choose to transcend regulations and protocols when human decency and military brotherhood demand a higher response. The story of Marcus Thompson and James Wellington prove that the finest moments in military service often occur not on battlefields, but in quiet acts of sacrifice that reveal the true character of those who serve.